The question of what architecture is has created a dialogue within the architecture community for centuries. But is there a single definition that captures it best? Not necessarily. Architects employ their own definitions of architecture based on their experience and background. Therefore, there is no one definition of architecture. In this video, multiple perspectives will be examined on what defines architecture, be it form, function, theory, education, or a plethora of other factors. This definition is only accurate in the most basic sense, because it only considers art and science, the flagship components of architecture. It fails to consider the relationship between design and many other factors such as history and culture. While the dictionary does provide a sufficient definition for many outside of architecture looking in, it is not enough for those who practice and theorize.
Go.
In 25 BC, Vitruvius was one of the first people to propose and record a definition of architecture. He argued that these three tenets of architecture were equally important and required for good buildings. By dividing architecture into three codependent branches, Vitruvius strengthens his point that an architect should be familiar with a multitude of subjects, not just the architecture itself. Additionally, Vitruvius saw architecture as, quote, the child of practice and theory, not one or the other. His definition began the concept of architecture as not just one subject, but many subjects that are intertwined, an idea that still holds merit today and is seen in many other definitions. Gordon Smith's 2012 definition of architecture echoes the Vitruvian triad, stating three different supplementary aspects that create architecture itself. The format of Smith's definition argues that Vitruvius's ideas still have value in the 21st century. As an educator, Smith examines what is taught in architecture schools across the country as a basis for his definition. By subdividing architectural education, and thus architecture, into a definition that mirrors Vitruvius's, Smith provides a more successful definition that takes multiple aspects into account. By contrasting buildings and architecture, Pesner creates a dialectical scale for defining what architecture is and what is not. As a career professor and a researcher, Pesner embodies the theoretical side of architecture. Because he is only concerned with the aesthetics in this definition, Pesner fails to take into account the significance that many ordinary-looking buildings can have in the lives of those who use them. This emphasis on only one aspect of architecture, especially in the complicated and globalized world that we live in, weakens Pesner's definition. Zaha Hadid did not compromise her concepts or designs for practical constraints or technology. Instead, her swooping, curved, futuristic buildings tended to be structurally intricate. She created landmark projects for all types of functional programs. Her buildings are never bland or mundane, but moreover assertive statements of a particular view, that the world may indeed look different. The Heydar Aliyev Center challenged people to think about architecture in a different way. While architecture is not only about shelter, it is more than a simple enclosure. While it should excite you, calm you, and make you think, it should also take into account an aesthetic appeal, which is an aspect of her definition that architecture ignores. An architectural historian and urban planner, Kostov understood architecture to be a play with acts and scenes that respond to human life. Architecture wasn't just a series of important and famous buildings, but rather every frame of a movie. It allows people to congregate for different purposes, whether it be socializing or surviving. Buildings now don't solely serve as shelter, but are rather designed with a purpose, and cities have become more complex as more needs emerge met. While architecture is a social act which houses human activity, it still needs to keep in mind the aesthetic aspects which makes it architecture, and not merely just a building. It should incorporate human activity without compromising the aesthetic value. Livius Woods Light Pavilion has a particular section of the building that stands out from the rest in order to show its unique qualities. The use of many beams going in every direction clearly display Woods' goal of individuality within all of his projects. But while Livius Woods highlights uniqueness in all of his projects, his approach to architecture is almost purely theoretical. The Light Pavilion is the only major built project credited to Livius Woods. The theory-practice divide exemplified by Livius Woods' work reveals the irony of his definition, which claims that architecture is a built realization, seemingly excluding theoretical work from the realm of architecture. Although architecture is most often thought of as a tangible structure, theoretical work can be just as valuable to architectural discourse, as an important point that is neglected in this definition. Le Corbusier's approach to architecture embraced engineering as a source of beauty. Although, like Pesner, his definition also establishes a scale of comparison between construction and architecture. Le Corbusier's architecture blurs the lines between the opposite ends of the scale. In the Villa Savoye, Le Corbusier prominently features construction elements such as the exposed grid of pillars. Le Corbusier's definition of architecture succeeds by understanding the breadth of architecture as both an art and science. The definition of architecture is constantly evolving. There will always be a new take on architecture. Multiple definitions are necessary to capture the complex characteristics of architecture, since it is both historically and contextually contingent. There will always be a new take on architecture every year, in every location, and by every architect. The most successful definition of architecture understands this breadth, while the least successful attempt to compartmentalize the discipline. But despite the relative success or failure of any one definition, there is no one true definition. It is crucial to analyze multiple views on what defines the multifaceted and evolving discipline of architecture.